I'm Sharon, 31, female. I'm a 911 dispatcher, a job where chaos is a constant and composure is the only currency that matters. My life outside of the headset is the opposite. It's quiet, structured, and centered around my small family. After my father passed away last year, my mother, Carol, a retired librarian who finds comfort in the gentle rustle of book pages, moved in with me. It was a period of adjustment, but we found a peaceful rhythm. My brother, Tom, and his wife, Jessica, however, lived in a different universe, one of country clubs, brand sponsorships, and a meticulously curated public image. I always knew Jessica was difficult, a woman who measured worth in carats and square footage, but I never understood the depths of her cruelty until I was hidden by a pyramid of canned beans in a grocery store aisle, and heard the words that would ignite a fire within me. She was about to learn that a 911 dispatcher is trained to see every detail, connect every dot, and when necessary, orchestrate a response that is perfectly, devastatingly calm. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed a monotonous tune, a sound so familiar it was practically white noise. I was on my day off, a rare Tuesday of blissful nothingness, and had decided to pick up ingredients for a pot roast, my mom's favorite comfort food. I had told her to stay home and rest, but she insisted on coming, saying she enjoyed the simple outing. As we walked in, Jessica called my mom. She was at the same store and had forgotten her wallet, asking if Mom could pay for her groceries, promising to pay her back immediately. Mom, ever the peacemaker, agreed instantly. They met at the entrance while I went ahead to grab a cart. I saw them together near the checkout lanes a few minutes later. Mom was holding her small, worn leather wallet, while Jessica stood with her arms crossed, tapping an immaculately manicured finger against her phone. Jessica managed a high, end-fashion boutique downtown and always looked like she just stepped out of a magazine, even here, surrounded by ketchup displays and squeaky, wheeled carts. I was in the next aisle over, deciding between Yukon Gold and russet potatoes, when I saw them approach the cashier. The cashier was a young woman with a friendly face, someone who clearly recognized Jessica. "Hi, Mrs. Reynolds," she said with a bright smile, finding everything okay today. Jessica returned a smile that was pure performance, just the usual thank you. She gestured vaguely behind her where my mother stood quietly, holding her wallet. Mom offered the cashier a polite, shy smile. The cashier's eyes flickered toward my mom. "And how are you today, ma'am?" she asked kindly. What happened next felt like a scene in slow motion. Jessica leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that was perfectly audible from my position behind a tower of pasta sauce jars. "Oh," she began, with a dismissive little laugh, "don't mind her. That old woman is the maid. Don't talk to her. She just handles the payments." The words hit me with physical force. The air in my lungs seemed to evaporate. My mom, Carol, a woman who had spent 40 years fostering a love of literature in children, a woman who read poetry to me when I was sick, a woman whose hands were soft from turning pages and kneading dough, reduced to a nameless, invisible servant. The friendly cashier's face faltered, her smile replaced by a mask of awkward confusion. She glanced at my mother, who was staring down at the scuffed toes of her shoes, her shoulders slightly hunched. My mom had heard every single word. She didn't look up. She simply took out her debit card as Jessica finished loading her organic kale and artisanal cheeses onto the belt. My first instinct was to storm over there, to let loose the fury that was boiling in my veins. But one look at my mother's posture stopped me cold. She was trying to shrink, to disappear. Causing a scene would only deepen her humiliation, making her the center of a spectacle she never asked for. My training kicked in, overriding the emotional storm. Assess, don't react. Control the situation. I stayed hidden. I watched as my mother paid for nearly $300 worth of Jessica's groceries. Jessica didn't thank her. She just took the bags from the clerk and said, "I'll wait in the car. Try not to take too long." Then she was gone, her heels clicking an arrogant rhythm on the linoleum floor. When my mom met me by the produce section a minute later, her face was a careful blank. She didn't mention the incident, and I didn't dare bring it up. We finished our shopping in near silence, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between us, heavier than any bag of potatoes. On the drive home, she stared out the window, her reflection a pale, sad ghost in the glass. I knew then that this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a declaration of war, and Jessica had no idea who she had just provoked. The silence in our house that evening was deafening. Mom retreated to her room with a book, but I knew she wasn't reading. The pot roast sat untouched in the kitchen, its comforting aroma now feeling like a mockery. The cruelty of Jessica's words replayed in my mind, each syllable a fresh stab of anger. This wasn't just an insult, it was a calculated attempt to erase my mother's identity, to relegate her to the status of an object. I decided I couldn't let it go. My brother needed to know what kind of person he was married to. The next day, I called Tom. He was a real estate agent, perpetually busy, his tone always a half second away from needing to take another call. I explained what I had overheard, keeping my voice as steady and factual as a dispatcher reporting an incident. I laid out the scene, the words, and the crushing effect it had on Mom. His response was exactly what I had feared, yet it still disappointed me on a profound level. "Sharon, you must have misheard," he said, a weary sigh in his voice. "Jess has been under a ton of pressure lately. She's planning this massive charity gala for the boutique. It's for a good cause. She'd never ever say something like that." I was 10 feet away, Tom. I insisted, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "There's no misunderstanding. She called our mother her maid." Well, maybe it was a joke that didn't land right. He offered lamely, "You know how she is. She has a dry sense of humor." He was making excuses, building a wall of denial around his perfect life. The conversation went in circles, with him defending his wife's character and me repeating the cold, hard facts. He ended the call by telling me I was overreacting and trying to cause drama. He promised Jessica would pay Mom back for the groceries, as if the money was ever the point. That phone call was a turning point. I realized Tom wasn't just oblivious, he was an accomplice. He was so invested in the life Jessica had built for them, the social status, the beautiful home, the illusion of philanthropic perfection, that he was willing to sacrifice his own mother's dignity to protect it. My fight wasn't just with Jessica anymore, it was with the entire facade they had constructed. With my dispatcher's mindset fully engaged, I shifted from emotional reaction to observation. I started paying closer attention during the obligatory family dinners and weekend visits. The abuse was there, hiding in plain sight, 1,000 tiny cuts. When Mom would tell a story about her time as a librarian, Jessica would interrupt with a loud, theatrical yawn. If Mom offered to help in the kitchen, Jessica would hand her the trash to take out, smiling sweetly as she did. She had a habit of misplacing Mom's reading glasses, only for them to turn up in a place Mom never would have put them. At a family barbecue, Jessica made a toast to family, her eyes sweeping over everyone before landing on my mother. "And to everyone who helps make our lives easier," she'd said, raising her glass. It was coded language, designed to be just plausible enough to deny, but we all knew who she was talking about. Tom would just smile and nod, oblivious or unwilling to see. The mask was slipping, revealing the ugliness beneath. Jessica wasn't just mean. She was a bully who got a thrill from exercising power over someone she perceived as weak. She saw my mother's quiet nature not as a sign of gentle strength, but as a vacuum to be filled with her own arrogance. She was systematically trying to diminish my mother, to make her feel small and insignificant in her own family, and I was going to be the one to stop her. The question was no longer if, but how. My job taught me that every story has multiple layers, and the truth is usually buried under the one that's presented most loudly. Jessica's loud story was that of a successful, charitable businesswoman. It was time to start peeling back the layers. My anger had cooled into a cold, sharp resolve. I needed more than just anecdotes of her cruelty. I needed concrete proof of who she really was. I needed leverage. My investigation started with her boutique, Jolie. It was her pride and joy, the centerpiece of her public identity. She was constantly featured in local lifestyle blogs and magazines, praised for her fashion sense and, more importantly, her philanthropic efforts. The annual charity gala she was planning was always her crowning achievement, an event that cemented her status as one of the city's elite socialites. This year, the beneficiary was a little-known organization called the Children's Compassion Fund. I decided to start there. I did a quick search for the Children's Compassion Fund. The online presence was minimal, a bare bones website with stock photos of smiling children and a vague mission statement about providing resources for underprivileged youth. There were no staff bios, no annual reports, no specific program details. The donation page linked directly to a payment processor. but the About Us section was conspicuously empty. It felt flimsy. My next step was to find someone who had seen behind the boutique's curated facade. I remembered Jessica complaining months ago about a disloyal manager she had to fire. A little digging on social media helped me find her. Her name was Amelia. I sent her a message explaining that I was doing some research on local businesses and their charitable work, and asked if she'd be willing to talk about her time at Jolie. To my surprise, she replied almost immediately, "I'd love to." We met at a coffee shop far from Jessica's usual haunts. Amelia was nervous at first, but once she started talking, it was like a dam breaking. She painted a picture of Jessica that was far uglier than I could have imagined. "She's a tyrant," Amelia said, stirring her latte with a trembling hand. "The smile is just for the customers and the cameras. Behind the scenes, she berates staff for the smallest things, docks pay for imagined slights, and fosters this toxic, competitive environment." Then she dropped the bombshell. "The charity stuff. It's a joke." She scoffed. "She pressures us to upsell customers by talking about the charity, but I saw the books once. The amount she actually donates is a tiny fraction of what she implies, and she always inflates the numbers for the press releases." Amelia leaned closer, her voice dropping. "And the gala is the biggest scam of all. She gets vendors to donate services and products for exposure, charges an exorbitant ticket price, and then the proceeds go to her pet charity. But who is the charity? We never saw a representative. We never got a thank you letter to the staff. It's all just her. She told me that Jessica dealt with a lot of cash transactions for vendor fees and silent auction items, and Amelia was certain that a significant portion of that cash never made it to any official bank account." I asked her about the Children's Compassion Fund specifically. Amelia shook her head. "Never heard of it until this year. Every year it's a new, obscure foundation. It's easier to hide the money that way, I guess." I left the coffee shop with a clear picture. Jessica wasn't just a cruel snob, she was a fraud. Her entire public persona was built on a foundation of lies and exploitation. She used the veneer of charity to enrich herself and build her social standing, all while treating the people around her, including my own mother, as disposable props in her grand performance. My mission had just evolved. This was no longer just about defending my mom's honor. It was about dismantling Jessica's entire corrupt empire. The information from Amelia was damning, but it was still hearsay. I needed undeniable, documented evidence. My dispatcher brain was in high gear, thinking about systems, records, and the trails people unwittingly leave behind. This was where my world and Jessica's would collide. While she was an expert in curating a public image, I was an expert in finding the truth hidden in the data. And for this, I needed help from someone who spoke the language of servers and code as fluently as I spoke the language of crisis. I needed Ben. Ben was one of my closest friends, an IT specialist who worked for a cybersecurity firm. We'd met years ago through a mutual friend and bonded over a shared love for escape rooms and a disdain for pretentious people. He was a digital wizard, the kind of guy who could find anything online. I called him and laid out the whole story, from the whisper in the grocery aisle to the conversation with Amelia. He was quiet for a moment after I finished, and then he said, "So, this woman is a monster who uses a fake charity to fund her lifestyle and bullies your mom. Okay, I'm in. What do you need?" I needed him to trace the money. I needed him to find the cracks in Jessica's digital fortress. We started with the Children's Compassion Fund. Ben got to work, and it didn't take him long to find what I couldn't. He ran a search on the business registration database. The charity was registered as a sole proprietorship, not a non-profit. The registered owner, Jessica's mother, and the official address was a P.O. box in a town 3 states away. It was a classic shell, designed to look legitimate at a glance but fall apart under the slightest scrutiny. Next, Ben dove into her business, Jolie. He looked at public filings, vendor reviews, and online financial reports. He discovered that several of her sponsors for the gala were companies that had gone out of business years ago. She was padding her sponsor list with ghost entities to make the event seem more prestigious than it was. But the real breakthrough came from a place I never would have thought to look. Ben asked if Jessica had a social media presence beyond her public, carefully managed accounts. I mentioned she was obsessed with her image, so it seemed unlikely. He said, "Everyone has a place to vent." He started searching for accounts using variations of her name, her pet names for her dog, her birthday, anything I could think of. After hours of searching, he found it, a private Instagram account under a pseudonym. The profile picture was of her prized convertible, not her face. The bio simply read, "Living the real life." He couldn't access the posts, but he could see the list of followers. It was small, only about 30 people. I recognized a few names as her close circle of equally shallow friends. The problem was how to get inside. We couldn't hack it. That was illegal and would compromise any evidence we found. Then I had an idea. I remembered one of the names on the list. A woman Jessica was always in competition with, a frenemy. I knew from Jessica's own public posts that they had recently had a falling out over some petty social drama. I created a new, anonymous Instagram account. I crafted a carefully worded message to this woman, framing it as coming from another person in their social circle who was also tired of Jessica's behavior. I hinted that Jessica had been posting about her behind her back on a private account. It was a long shot, a piece of social engineering based on a hunch about her vanity and insecurity. It worked. Less than an hour later, my anonymous account received a flood of screenshots. The woman had taken pictures of dozens of Jessica's private posts and sent them to us, and they were vile. There were posts mocking my mother, complete with pictures she had taken of her sleeping on the couch. One caption read, "The freeloader is finally quiet. #mother-in-law problems." There were posts bragging about her scams. Just convinced another vendor to donate for exposure at the gala. More money for my shoe fund. #girlboss. She complained about Tom, about her employees, about her clients. It was a cesspool of her true personality. We had it, the digital smoking gun. We had screenshots of her admitting to the fraud and expressing her unvarnished contempt for our family. My hands were shaking as I looked at them. This was the weapon I needed. Jessica had built her kingdom in the public eye, and that is exactly where I was going to burn it to the ground. With the evidence secure, a digital folder brimming with incriminating screenshots, business filings, and Amelia's written testimony, the final piece of the puzzle was the delivery system. The plan began to form in my mind, crisp and clear, like a dispatch call cutting through static. Revenge, I decided, was a dish best served publicly, and there was no better stage than Jessica's own magnum opus, the annual charity gala. The event was the very symbol of her fraudulent life. It was where she laundered her reputation, turning cash from exploited vendors and duped attendees into social capital. To expose her there, in front of her adoring audience, would be to shatter the illusion completely. It wouldn't just be justice for my mother. It would be a complete and total unraveling of the lie she lived. My first step was to secure a seat at the show. The tickets were outrageously expensive, a price tag designed to keep out the unworthy and signal exclusivity. I used a significant chunk of my savings to purchase a table for 8. It felt like a worthy investment in my mother's peace of mind. Next, I curated the guest list for my table with surgical precision. This wasn't about having friends there for support. This was about assembling an audience of key players who could amplify the fallout. I invited Amelia, the brave ex-employee who had spoken out. I invited the most prominent local lifestyle journalist, a woman who had written no fewer than 5 glowing puff pieces about Jessica's philanthropic spirit. I extended an invitation to the owner of the upscale outdoor mall where Jessica's boutique, Jolie, was a tenant. For the remaining seats, I invited 2 of Jessica's biggest clients, wealthy women whose social influence was currency in Jessica's world. I told them all that a special presentation on community integrity was going to be made, an anonymous tip I was passing along. The mystery intrigued them enough to accept. The centerpiece of my plan was a short, devastatingly effective video presentation. I spent a week working on it with Ben. We kept it under 3 minutes, knowing that attention spans at such events were short. It was a masterclass in concise destruction. It opened with a beautiful, scrolling montage of photos from Jessica's public Instagram, showing her smiling, posing at charity events, hugging children. The perfect philanthropist. A gentle, inspiring piano track played in the background. Then the music would scratch to a halt. The screen would flash to the screenshot of her private post about my mother. The freeloader is finally quiet. The contrast was jarring. From there, it was a rapid fire succession of evidence. We displayed the Shell Charities business registration next to a screenshot of her bragging about her shoe fund. We used simple, clean graphics created by a freelance designer friend of Ben's to create a flowchart, visually tracing the money from the gala's ticket sales and donations to the P, Oh. Box and, as Ben had discovered through some brilliant digital forensics, into an offshore account under a name that was an anagram of her own. We included 2 more of her most vicious posts mocking her clients and her own husband. The final piece was the audio. We included a short, voice-altered clip of Amelia's testimony describing the cash-skimming and toxic work environment. The video ended with a single question in bold, white text on a black screen. Who is the Children's Compassion Fund really helping? Ben arranged for a contact of his, a freelance AV technician who often worked these corporate gigs, to be on duty at the gala that night. For a generous cash payment, he agreed to switch the USB drives at the critical moment. Jessica's self-congratulatory slideshow would be replaced with our 3-minute truth bomb. In the days leading up to the gala, my brother Tom called me several times, his voice buzzing with excitement. He gushed about how proud he was of Jessica, how this event was going to put them on the map. He even had the audacity to ask if I wanted to volunteer to help set up. I politely declined, telling him I had other plans. He was so blinded by the shine of their life that he couldn't see the rot beneath. He had no idea he was gleefully polishing the stage for his own wife's spectacular downfall. The ballroom of the Grand Oak Hotel was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. Chandeliers dripped crystals from the ceiling, casting a warm, golden light on the well-heeled crowd. The air buzzed with self-important chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. It was a perfect portrait of manufactured elegance, and at its center, holding court like a queen, was Jessica. She was radiant in a sapphire blue dress that probably cost more than my car. She moved through the room with an effortless grace, accepting compliments, laughing at jokes, her hand resting possessively on Tom's arm. My brother looked like the cat who got the cream, beaming with pride as he stood beside his magnificent, fraudulent wife. They were the picture of success. My guests and I were seated at a table near the back, offering a perfect vantage point of the entire room. The journalist was already taking notes, the mall owner looked bored, and Jessica's clients were busy gossiping. Amelia was visibly nervous, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I gave her a reassuring nod. We were just spectators waiting for the main event. After an overpriced dinner of mediocre salmon, the lights dimmed. The MC, a local news anchor, walked onto the stage and began the evening's program. He spoke glowingly of Jessica's commitment to the community, her tireless work, her generous spirit. I felt a cold knot of anger tighten in my stomach. Then he introduced the woman of the hour, and Jessica glided onto the stage to a round of enthusiastic applause. She took the microphone, her eyes shining with practiced emotion. "Thank you all so much for being here," she began, her voice thick with fake humility. "When I started Jolie, I didn't just want to sell clothes. I wanted to build a community. I wanted to give back." She spoke for several minutes, weaving a beautiful narrative of compassion and duty. She talked about the struggles of underprivileged children and how the Children's Compassion Fund was making a real difference. "They say it takes a village to raise a child," she said, her voice catching as she reached her crescendo. "And looking out at all of your wonderful faces tonight, I know that our village is strong." She gestured to the large projection screens flanking the stage. "I want to share a short presentation with you now, to show you exactly where your generous contributions are going." This was it. She nodded to the tech booth at the back of the room. My heart began to pound in my chest. On the screens, the glossy opening montage of our video began to play, accompanied by the gentle piano music. Jessica smiled, thinking it was her presentation. She turned her back to the screen to face the audience, basking in the glow of her supposed good deeds. Then, the music screeched to a halt, the smiling photos vanished, replaced by the stark black and white screenshot of her Instagram post. The words "the freeloader is finally quiet" were projected 10 feet high. A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Jessica's smile froze. She half-turned, her expression shifting from triumph to confusion, and then to pure, unadulterated horror as she saw the image of my mother sleeping on our couch displayed for all to see. The video continued its relentless assault, the screenshot of her bragging about the shoe fund, the flowchart of her financial deception, the posts mocking her husband and clients. The room had fallen into a stunned, absolute silence, broken only by the disembodied, voice-altered testimony of Amelia detailing the fraud. Tom, who had been standing proudly by the side of the stage, looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face was pale, his mouth hanging open. He stared at the screen, then at his wife, a look of dawning, sickening realization on his face. At my table, the journalist was typing furiously into her phone. The mall owner was leaning forward, his eyes narrowed. Jessica's clients were staring at the screen, then at each other, their faces masks of outrage. When the final question, who is the Children's Compassion Fund really helping, faded to black, the silence held for a beat longer. Then I stood up, my voice, calm and clear from years of handling panicked callers, cut through the tension. "Jessica," I said, making sure everyone could hear me, "I believe you have some explaining to do." Every head in the room swiveled first to me, then back to the woman on the stage, who now looked small and exposed under the harsh glare of the spotlight. Her mask of perfection had not just slipped, it had been shattered into a million pieces. The fallout was not a slow burn, it was an explosion. In the immediate aftermath of the video, Jessica stood frozen on the stage for a few seconds before stammering something incoherent into the microphone and fleeing. Tom, after a moment of paralysis, scrambled after her. The gala ended abruptly as guests, murmuring in shocked tones, began to leave in droves. My work was done. My guests and I left quietly amidst the chaos. The journalist from my table didn't even say goodbye. She was already on the phone with her editor, her voice electric with the thrill of a breaking scandal. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. The journalist had published a scathing, detailed expose overnight, complete with quotes from an anonymous source, and a link to the business registration for the Shell charity. The local news channels picked it up, and soon the charity gala scandal was the #1 trending topic in the city. Our video, leaked by someone at the event, went viral. The consequences for Jessica and Tom were swift and brutal. The mall owner who had been at my table personally served Jessica with an eviction notice for her boutique, citing a morality clause in her lease. Her high-profile clients publicly announced they were cutting ties. The bank, alerted to the fraudulent activity, froze all of their personal and business accounts pending an investigation. Within a week, both the IRS and the State Attorney General's office announced they were launching formal investigations into Jessica Reynolds and the so-called Children's Compassion Fund. Tom called me 2 days after the gala. He started the conversation by screaming, calling me jealous and vindictive, accusing me of ruining their lives. When the anger didn't work, he switched to begging, pleading with me to issue a statement saying it was all a misunderstanding, a family feud that had gotten out of hand. Was it a misunderstanding when she called our mother a maid, Tom? I asked calmly. Was it a misunderstanding when she stole from people who trusted her? You had a choice. You could have listened to me weeks ago. You chose to protect her lies instead of our mother's dignity. These are the consequences of your choice, not mine. I hung up the phone and blocked his number. I sat down with my mom that evening and finally told her everything. I showed her the screenshots, explained the financial fraud, and described the scene at the gala. She listened silently, her expression a mixture of profound sadness and quiet validation. When I was finished, she took my hand. She was cruel, Mom said softly. I thought I was imagining it, that I was being too sensitive. Thank you for seeing me, Sharon. Thank you for believing me. In that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. The revenge was satisfying, but healing the invisible wounds Jessica had inflicted on my mother was the true victory. Months have passed. Jessica and Tom are buried in legal battles. They had to sell their house to pay their lawyers. Tom's real estate license was suspended due to his involvement in the financial scandal. Their perfect life has been completely and utterly dismantled. I feel no pity for them, only a distant sense of justice. They built their house on a foundation of cruelty and lies, and I simply held up a mirror to show them the rotten side. My mom and I have found a new, more peaceful normal. The cloud of Jessica's passive aggression is gone, and in its place, our home is filled with warmth and laughter again. Sometimes I think about the woman in the grocery store, whispering poison about the old woman beside her. She thought my mother was invisible, insignificant. She learned the hard way that a quiet woman can have a very loud daughter, one who knows exactly how to answer a call for help.